On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what went right for the Suns in Game 2? What went wrong for the Suns in Game 2? And what is so different from their regular season dominance over Minnesota? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday as we get closer to Game 3 in the Valley. Wherever you are finding us, thank you for finding us. We are free and available everywhere, including YouTube, so just hit that follow or subscribe button on the app you are using. Get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday, and become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all season long. Today's show, guys, is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Let's get to what the Suns did well in Game 2, and I promise there are a few. Then we'll get to what didn't work for the Suns in Game 2, some adjustments, as I promised you guys on that recap show where I was a little emotional, to say the least, and that's, I think, where a lot of us were. And we'll close out the show with a look at what's gone so differently from those 3 regular season games. But as far as what worked, I think, to me, it's first and foremost is Bradley Beal. Just got done rewatching the game, and I honestly thought Beal played pretty well. That is a weird thing to say about somebody who had 4 turnovers and just 6 assists and shot basically 33% from the field. I know that's weird. But he was 2 of 4 from deep. Missed 3 shots at the basket, one of which I believe was blocked, so let's say he missed 2. It's obviously revisionist history to give him buckets that he did not make. I'm not here to do that. But the majority of the flat-out kind of weak points in his game on Tuesday night were mid-range jumpers that he either forced or tried to take over size and just didn't need to do that. Let's give him even one of those misses at the basket, so he's up to 3 of 5. He has the threes. You're already getting to a little bit of a more respectable game. 16 points, 7 of 16 from the field. Maybe you give him another one from mid-range on a good night. He's now 8 of 17 or whatever it is. The turnovers, I've talked plenty about yesterday, and I will continue to. The point that I'm making is, I think in particular, just running basic pick and roll, Beal looked good. He was able to get downhill in a way that Booker wasn't, Durant wasn't necessarily all that consistently. And a lot of the reason for that is Beal is being guarded by lesser defenders. Now, for Minnesota, a lesser defender is still a pretty good one. You know, at times that was Anthony Edwards. At times that was Alexander Walker. Maybe here and there it could be Conley, but not often. And that's perfectly fine to say. That's totally reasonable to say that Bradley Beal being guarded by the 3rd best perimeter defender on Minnesota's team is a place you should go as an offense. And it worked. And he not only scored for himself, but had some good moments with Nurkic. I just think that as far as the primary initiation of the offense, through 2 games, really, the Suns have been able to get pretty good stuff, get the ball moving, get the defense rotating, create some choices for Minnesota's guys out of Beal running pretty simple pick and roll. And so if you go into game 3 with that as your starting point, given as well, if you needed the reminder, which I don't think you do, that Beal was 6 of 9 from the field for 14 points in the April 5th matchup between these two teams, and then of course shot 67% from the field with 36 points and only 1 turnover in the final game of the regular season. This is not just a game 2 trend or even a this series trend. Beal has been able to take advantage of the Timberwolves defense in a way that the other stars on this Suns team have not been able to consistently do. That should be the focal point of the early minutes of game 1, and it doesn't have to get overly complicated given what we've seen. Another thing that worked for the Suns, scoring in transition, and I think they can continue to push the pace more, even though Minnesota has a good transition defense. I think, we still haven't really seen them try to run off of made shots. Maybe some of that more out of the comfort zone stuff is a little easier to execute at home. I don't know. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, and I'm sitting here hoping that something will happen that's unrealistic. Regardless, even setting that aside in terms of the fast break aspect of all of this, just getting the ball across half court sooner, getting your offense rolling sooner. We saw a lot of moments, especially when Karl Anthony Towns was out there, where the Suns were able to take advantage of cross matches, right? Because Minnesota defensively, as I just mentioned, are switching a pretty good amount. And that's fine when it's not Towns or it's not Gobert, but when it is those guys and suddenly Towns is having to take Booker or Beal or Allen again, or the guys off the bench, Gordon, O'Neal, the Suns were able to kind of work that to their advantage. And I think they can continue to do it. This game was lopsided beyond lopsided in Minnesota's favor in terms of transition scoring. Obviously, the Suns cutting down their own turnovers would go a long way to fixing that. That has to be up there, of course, but we're focusing on the positive right now to start. I think second on the list in terms of equalizing that transition imbalance from game 2, which was a huge part of why Minnesota was able to pull away, is the Suns finding ways to increase their own output on that end. And you cannot just trust that you're going to be able to force the Wolves into turnovers or that you're going to be able to even get full-on fast break, crazy lob dunks and all that stuff. No, just try to play a little faster and work those mismatches. The last thing is a smaller thing because, look, I don't know how sustainable it is, and there was some bad with the good, but it was Drew Eubanks as a roll man finisher at the rim. I'll get to Jusuf Nurkic more as the show goes along, but I do think you are seeing Minnesota take advantage of the fact that Nurkic is not an athletic finisher in those pick and roll situations downhill. They're trusting themselves to say, Rudy Gobert is going to play a little bit more aggressively, and we're going to be able to recover and either cut off Nurkic's path to the basket, stop him with a smaller player, plug up the passing lanes, or contain a closeout with a closeout after that kick-out pass happens. And we're not going to be that worried about Nurkic in those downhill situations. And they've been right. Drew Eubanks, on the other hand, makes it a little harder to do that because he can catch the ball on the roll and athletically finish over help defense or catch a lob over the top of that help defense and not even have to catch and finish. Of course, Eubanks also had some wild floater and bunny attempts around the basket, 3 of them, and they were all very rough. But just sort of tuck this away. I think there are opportunities, given the quickness of Thaddeus Young, to steal some minutes, play all three of these centers, decrease Nurkic's minutes, and you're not going to get those finishes from Thad, but I think the ability to kind of fill that space in the middle of the paint in those situations where Gobert is not in that space and be a passer, maybe it's even a layup. Is that crazy? That's probably crazy. But at the very least, some of those short roll passing situations I think are there for the taking with a more I don't want to disrespect Nurk, but look, somebody a little more fleet of foot who can operate there more decisively and more swiftly. Next up, what didn't work for the Suns? Now, I won't go overboard, but I'll be specific. What things were a little different from Game 1 that probably should not be replicated? We'll get into those next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What keeps a great championship team going is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors is here to give you everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performances. Whether that's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, or more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Keeping the show rolling. What did the Suns not do so well? Don't forget to be checking out Locked On NBA all playoffs long. That feed is going daily as well, giving you every night, every game analysis all throughout the postseason. So let's start with the most glaring, and it's the thing I already talked about quite a bit in the recap show, which I recommend checking out from Tuesday night into Wednesday morning if you haven't. But this is back to Nurkic. The more aggressive coverages in the pick and roll that the Suns tried out just failed. You obviously have to tip your hat to Minnesota. I talked about going into this series that Mike Conley operating with an aggressive look-to-score mindset would go a long way. I wouldn't say that quite happened in Game 1 because Towns was able to get it going a little bit in that second quarter. Edwards had his way in the third quarter, of course. But he did it. Conley did that in this game. He was ready for those kick passes when the Suns helped off of him. He got to the basket. He got to the floater. And then the Suns were in a situation where they were kind of having to guard pick and rolls run by Edwards or Conley with that more aggressive look with Nurkic out in space on the perimeter. And they could not execute that. Not only was Nurkic not really disrupting the ball handler, right? It's one thing to just kind of put your body out there and present yourself and kind of force the Wolves to adapt to it. It's another thing to maybe you make those guys pick up their dribble. Maybe you make those guys redirect themselves and get out of their comfort zone, get too far away from the guy they're trying to pass it to. That's kind of the point. They didn't do that. They didn't have help at the rim when they got the ball to Gobert or when the player that caught the ball attacked a closeout. That closeout defense to go recover over to the shooter that they had left open wasn't very good, so those guys weren't really, bothered when they caught it and put it on the ground. They really just had an open path to the basket. So yeah, you tip your hat to Conley. He was kind of the ball handler and the guy attacking those closeouts at different points. Obviously, McDaniels made some great plays. This wasn't all just the Suns playing those moments poorly, but if they had been better, I don't think it would have gotten so out of the ordinary for both Conley and McDaniels, which it did. Sticking on McDaniels, Well, so with all of this, the thing I was going to say about McDaniels, he also wasn't just attacking closeouts. The one thing that changed that did not go well for the Suns is that they were also flashing McDaniels to the free throw line in some of those moments where the ball handler was having to pass it out, Edwards or Conley. And it's something similar to what we saw the Suns do with Mikal Bridges when Booker or Paul had those same moments. You get that kind of perimeter guy who can at least kind of make a good decision with the ball in their hands over to support that. He gets the ball, and now suddenly, he has some space to operate in. McDaniel scored a couple times out of that. With all of that in general, I think we will probably see the Suns go to a more conservative defensive approach. At the end of the day, Anthony Edwards can beat you with pull-up jumpers, but that is probably the best possible option to make the Wolves go to, okay? And again, to reiterate, right? As I thought about this game overnight, I probably did not make enough of a point of this was a close game. This game felt very stuck in the mud and very similar to Game 1 in that there was foul trouble, there were turnovers, good shots being missed on both sides, just chippy, everything. Playoff basketball, right? But the reason that the Wolves were able to make this kind of a blowout is the Suns turned the ball over, the Wolves got to the line more, and obviously the Wolves converted those turnovers into 31 points. So the reason I bring all of that up in the context of pick and roll coverage is that if the Suns can kind of pick the better of two evils or the better of multiple evils, knowing that it can burn them anyway, you're talking about the difference between, what's going to limit them the most. And if the Suns can clean up their own sloppiness, we're going to see a close game in this series. And giving players open space, even if it is on the road for Minnesota now, is probably not the best choice versus making Ant prove that he can consistently, not just in one quarter like he has so far, but consistently burn you on those pull-up jumpers from 3, from 2, from wherever. I think we will see them go back to that. Finishing out with the Suns' defense, this is not something that happened a ton, but in the third quarter in particular, we saw the Suns guard Towns with O'Neal for a few possessions and guard Gobert with Durant for a few possessions. And mostly in those moments, they were switching everything. And when Durant was on Gobert, Nurkic was actually on Towns. That really only ended up happening for 1 or 2 possessions because Minnesota was playing a little faster in that stretch of the game, and the Suns weren't actually able to get to the matchups that they were trying to mix it up with. And so we didn't really see it, but when Gobert left the court and O'Neal joined the game after Allen's injury, I believe KD was on Reed or whoever, and O'Neal was on Cat, as I said, and they were switching that. Big picture, what ended up happening there is that Towns, that was the only portion of the game where he got comfortable. And that's been a through line through 2 games. The Wolves have been very good about finding Cat when he has mismatches that are beneficial for him. And Towns has been able to make the Suns pay. So as much as the switching might feel like a good option to slow down the ball handlers that Minnesota has, I'm kind of thinking going into game 3, you get back to basics, you kind of tried to guard things straight up, and bet that it will work. Last thing offensively for the Suns, this is sort of across both games, not so much of a huge adjustment in game 2, but worth noting, especially with Grayson Allen out, and this I'll talk about in the closing segment as well, but some of the guard screens and these early actions that the Suns like to do, that every team likes to do in the modern NBA, just to kind of get some early defensive rotation, make the defense think, maybe find a mismatch for your best player, whoever you want to be attacking in your offense. The Suns did not really get anything out of that. So they didn't get threes when that guy who sets the screen, the guard who sets the screen, oftentimes Allen, swung out and kind of popped for a shot. They didn't really clear up space where there was a panic toward, oh crap, that shooter is now free, let's overload that. It kind of just went nowhere. And sometimes in the worst cases, if you're not really thinking out there, then the Suns did that and suddenly ended up with a worse matchup because the Wolves took the chance and took the opportunity and said, great, we'll switch that because that actually helps us. And we have the mismatch we want now. We have the matchup we want to defend your best guy. So with Allen out, presumably this whole rest of this series with how ugly that looked, I don't think we'll see it as much anyway because he's the main guy they use for that. But just as you're thinking about some of what has changed, in this case, creating new limitations for the Suns, right? Things that aren't working that were working, that's definitely one of them. Next up, we're through 2 games. What's different between how the Suns were able to win in the regular season and why they've been so dominated through 2 games in this playoff series? First, today's show brought to you by Betterhelp. You guys have been asking for Betterhelp ads. Look at that. You didn't even know how much you loved them, but you do. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get things off of our chests, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let them out, especially to somebody who's unbiased about your life. So today, I want to really say how I feel about something, and you might even be thinking the same thing this week. Here's the deal. We're looking ahead toward Friday, toward Sunday. I love Footprint Center. It is my happy place. I have cherished memories of the 2021 run especially, but numerous moments where you guys, the Valley, has come out in full support of this team and just carried them, helped carry this group to awesome wins and awesome moments. I hope we get that, and I'm worried. I'm worried that it'll get ugly, and I really don't want it to. Therapy can be different for everybody, guys, but most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get those off of your chest every so often. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. Today's show also brought to you by DoorDash. We're headed toward Mother's Day, and you know what that means. You want to make your mom smile? Start Mother's Day with flowers or surprise her with gifts from the brands she loves. Delivered the very same day with DoorDash. Does mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or is she outdoorsy? Well, no matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and beyond. Shop with savings that would make her proud with a Dash Pass membership. You'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees apply, terms apply. But get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place with 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next order with code LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Closing out the show. Alright, so I want to go through some of the things, and we're only 2 games in. 3 games in the regular season wasn't a huge sample. I think we're all realizing that didn't tell the full story. So obviously, these 2 games don't tell the full story either. We'll have a much clearer picture once the Suns go home, once we see some adjustments, even more significant adjustments with the Suns' backs against the wall now and Minnesota going on the road and everything else. But we know enough to say a few things, and I think I have to start with just making shots. You know, we talk about it every game. It's boring, it sucks, the make or miss league stuff, but there is truth to it, obviously. The goal is to make shots, and luck plays a part. So what I did is I went back through the regular season games and the playoff games, and I added up the threes and the layup attempts. So 3-point attempts, layup attempts, or let's just say at-rim attempts this season. First regular season matchup had the most of those shots by the Suns at 48. April 5th matchup, 42 combined 3-pointers attempted and layups attempted. April 14th, final day of the regular season, 46 combined threes and layups attempted. In Game 1, 47. In Game 2, 44. So every single of these 5 games now that these 2 teams have played, the Suns have put up between 42 and 48 combined threes and layups. There is no outlier in there. There's no really low number, no really high number. It has been fairly consistent. However, the problem is how many of those they're making. In the regular season, they shot 68% at the rim and 51% from deep. In the playoffs so far, these 2 playoff games, only 53% at the rim, which is ugly, largely because of Game 1 where they shot below 50%, and only 35% in the playoffs, which would be below league average. So they're generating the same, the contest rate and how tightly they're being guarded, all that stuff. I'm not going to pretend like I watched each of the 40-plus in each game, but obviously you would expect Minnesota has probably gotten in their faces a little bit, made those shots harder, of course, but nevertheless, that is a huge drop-off. That explains a ton of what's going wrong here, right? So let's focus on that a little bit, and then we'll go to the Wolves side of things. But as I mentioned in that last segment, Grayson Allen just has not been involved. Now, I know he left both games, but all things considered, he didn't come back in either game, so I'm kind of considering the minutes he played as pretty regular, normal types of things we can look at. And so 17 minutes in Game 2, he's 1 of 2. I believe he took 3 or so shots in Game 1. But if you go back to, I'll skip the November game because, again, Beal didn't play and both teams were different. April 5th, where both teams scored less than 100 points, Allen was the top scorer on the Suns. Took the most shots, tied with Durant. Took the most threes, 4 of 8 from deep. Scored 23 points. In the final day of the regular season, Allen took 11 shots, so not quite as many, but took 3 threes and made all of them. Scored 20 points. So in both games these 2 teams played in April, Allen took more than 10 shots and scored more than 20 points. Even if you cut out the fact that obviously he wasn't going to get to that volume because he had to leave both games, he hasn't even been close to as involved, close to as high volume, even when he has been in there. And I think that's a real testament to the lack of overall ball movement, the lack of pace the Suns have played with, the fact that the Wolves have just been so effective kind of clamping things down early in the shot clock, switching stuff to just kind of bring things to a standstill, and we know Allen is the best indicator of when the Suns are at their most fluid as an offense. And so the fact that he has not been able to get involved shouldn't be a surprise, but it's definitely a big part of why they have not been able to be effective as much as they were. I just think Nurkic has been, as we move to the last kind of Suns thing, not good enough. Just flat out bad. I mean, and I'm not sure how that improves. As I mentioned in the first segment, I could easily see his minutes getting cut in this game 3, trying Thad Young a little bit, because he's not creating the same level of, his screens aren't as impactful, whether you blame that on him or Minnesota's point of attack defense just getting around those screens. It's true. As a finisher, he's really, really struggled. They're not really scared of him down there because of that. As a rim protector, you've seen him overthinking, I think, because he's worried about boxing out. He's not really even contesting some of these shots. Hasn't really been a deterrent at the rim. And then obviously as a pick and roll defender, as I've said, I have optimism that if he's in more of a drop in game 3, like I'm thinking they might try a little bit, that he can have some impactful moments by simplifying his responsibility. But when he's been asked to be a little bit more versatile, it has not gone well. That's kind of all the stuff you want Nurkic to be doing. I guess you would say as a passer, he's still had some flashes and everything, but not enough, and not even at the high levels that he had in the regular season. So even that's not really been there. That has to improve, or they have to find a different option at center, including maybe Durant at the 5. They'll probably go to that if they're down in the second half of game 3, I would think too. Last but not least, Minnesota. This is a very incremental downtick, but it matters when you're just adding up all the little things that go into a series tilting in one direction. Minnesota, as I talked about plenty in the preview and in the lead up to the series, averaged 16 turnovers per game in the regular season against the Suns. In the playoffs, that number has gone down to 13.5. Still a lot, all things considered, but not as many. So you cut down the total opportunities the Suns have to score in transition, plus Minnesota has really buckled down their transition defense, and that is another part of why, combined with the Suns obviously making their own mistakes and coughing the ball up, that is a big part of why the transition scoring, the fast break points, have been so skewed toward the Wolves. So we'll continue to monitor all of this. Of course, there's hope. It's only 2-0. Crazier things have happened, but it does not look great right now. The Suns have a lot of answers they need to find, and with an injury now to Allen and one of their core players in Nurkic being significantly outplayed, it doesn't look pretty. That said, you have a big 3 for a reason. If those guys can score, if Beal can in particular be impactful much more than he has been and be utilized much more than he has been, be aggressive much more than he has been, there's hope. That'll wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe to get another episode heading into Game 3 on Friday, as well as a recap post-game on Friday night. Enjoy the game. Well, enjoy your Thursday first, and I will talk to you to close out the week.